Welcome to the Martin E. Siegel Theater Center here at the Graduate Center CUNY and to Prelude 21, Start Making Sense. It is our annual theater and performance festival celebrating the work of New York theater artists and ensembles. And it's hard enough in normal times to create work for the stage and for spaces inside and outside, but in the time of Corona, we all are faced with exceptional challenges. And we are here to celebrate again the extraordinary achievements that come out of the New York theater community. It is time, I think, and we feel, to start making sense, to ask questions. Why are we making theater? But also, how are we producing it? And for whom? And this is a great investigation again into the mechanics of making art in New York City. And we also invited theater ensembles from around the US, from Detroit and Cincinnati, St. Louis and Philadelphia, New Orleans, to join us. And this will be an extraordinary look into what is on the minds of artists right now. We also have many panel discussions. We have an award which we're giving out to honor outstanding members of the New York theater community. So I would like to all of you to join in and get an insight of what is happening.
Kwam Gamel Muhemo. Greetings, everyone. I am Opalanietet, also known as Ryan Victor Pierce. I'm a member of He, Him, His. I'm a member of the Nanacoke Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation. And I'm also a first-year student here at the Graduate Center at CUNY. And I'm also the founder and artistic director of Eagle Project. And I certainly want to thank CUNY and the Eagle Center for the Prelude Festival, and also to HowlRound for streaming and hosting us today. So Wanishi, thank you, and it's a privilege and honor to be joined by three wonderful Native American performing artists. And we're just going to go around to open up this discussion and have everyone introduce themselves. I will start in this kind of Zoom square format. We'll kind of go clockwise. So I will start to looking at the camera to my left, which is Ms. Rhiana Yazzie.
Hi, hi Ryan, thank you. Yat Yinishke Rhiana Yazzie, Dohat Nishle, Tradnazani Bashichin, Nihitle Dashiche, Do Trachini Dashanale, Kuthegodenetsa. My name is Rhiana Yazzie, and I am a member of the Navajo Nation, a citizen, and I'm a playwright, I'm a director, and I'm a filmmaker, and I'm the artistic director of a theater company called New Native Theater that's 13 years old and based in Dakota Territory, also known as the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And I'm just really honored to be here and to chat with these wonderful, wonderful artists I've always looked up to and just enjoy their beautiful work. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rhiana. And next, going around on my clockwise fashion, is Ms. Vicky Ramirez.
Hi. Chuen Iskanahe, Giafe Vicky Ramirez. Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm a playwright, enrolled member of the Tuscarora Nation from Six Nations originally, but have been living in New York City for about 30 years. Not a multi-hyphenate. I'm so impressed by you guys doing all those wonderful jobs. Pretty awesome. I do some writing and some teaching, and I also work with podcasts and script writing, screenplay writing as well. And it's a delight and honor to be here and enjoy this conversation with these wonderful people, and be a lot of fun. And so, Yahweh, thank you, and back to you, Ryan.
Great, thank you, Vicky. And next is joining us today is Mara Garcia.
Shio Nikadu Nuidaida Wuton Aniki Lohi Dikiawi Chiki Duagi Nole Galshkishki Nole Do you Garielika Ahni Chido Kohig. My name is Moira Garcia. I am a dancer, a choreographer, and an erotic artist. I am Cherokee, non-enrolled. I'm originally from North Carolina and also Mattamuskeet. And I'm not Thai, so I'm standing in for Thai. It says, I think it still says Thai on the information. He could not be here, but he was the curator that chose my work that is being shown in the festival. So I'm just delighted to be here with y'all, and I'm looking forward to talking.
Great. Yes, thank you, Mara. And as I said, we're honored to have you with us today. And honored to have everyone. And I'll start with Mara actually on our first topic for this afternoon, is playing with forms. Would you mind sharing with us and our audience this afternoon as to the different kinds of artistic forms that you play with in your work, and how that may counter the kind of traditional Euro-American style of dance and or theater?
Yes, thank you. And I just took off my bracelets because I realized they were making jingling noises, which may be interesting, but probably not so great. I've been thinking about this a lot, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, and also with the beginning of the protests and a lot of the equity movements. But some of my thinking about this was really helped by a man named Charles Coronejo. He is Maori from Aotearoa and is a performer, choreographer, dancer. And I was able to take his intensive while in Vancouver with Raven Spirit, which is a dance ensemble there, wonderful dance ensemble led by Michelle Olsen. And so one of the things he said was that the movements and the actions and the work that we do as Indigenous people, whether they are traditional, quote unquote, traditional things that we're doing in official ceremony or things that we're doing in our home, like cooking, planting, all of these activities, when they are repeated and taught and shown, those are valid forms of movement. We have been practicing them, So if you grew up in a place where there's red dirt like I did, playing as a child with that red dirt and that manipulation of the dirt and playing with it and forming little objects with it. If my brother's watching, he knows what I'm talking about. We pretended we were making pottery. We weren't really making pottery, but the point is, we were playing with that dirt. We had our hands in that dirt, and later on, planting in that dirt. And so those types of movements, those actions and those connections that we form are also valid. They're valid forms of movement, and they're valid places to create from. So, and they're as valid as something that you might learn in a ballet class, or if you go to a choreography theory class and talk about these prompts, which may seem random to us because they don't come from our experience or from our culture. Our experiences, our culture, and the work and the actions that we do are as valid as what you may see in a kind of university setting. So to me, that's really interesting, and I'm really interested in the form. So the actual form of work, for example, I have pieces that I've created that are based on digging, or that are based on the way you, I don't know if you can say, the way you twist corn off a stalk, the way you put seeds in the ground. I have a piece that's ancestor dances. It's when my grandma is shaking that skillet over that. So these actions of work, they're really fascinating to me. So those are movements that I put in my choreography. Another form I'm also fascinated with is the form of each person. For example, each of us have things that we do over and over. If I sat there and watched each of you and you watched me, probably at the end of this, we can come up with some gestures that we're always doing, like the dance of Vickie, the dance of Ryan, the dance of Rhiana. And when I'm just going through life, I see people moving, and I think of that movement as their movement. And so people appear in my choreography. Sometimes I tell them, sometimes I don't. They don't know, that they're there. But to me, that is another form. So the dance of someone else, meaning the dance of their actual spiritual being, their physical form, that is another type of form that I use in my work. So I could talk about this a lot, but now I'm going to be quiet. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mara, and yeah, and then that's so empowering, I mean, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. That just sounds so empowering in terms of the actions of what we do and how they can be art, and even I guess how many sometimes of those traditional ways of doing things is still ingrained in us in ways that we don't even realize. So I really thank you for that. I like to keep this subject open and move to Vickie. Vickie, would you mind sharing with us, in terms of how you the forms that the forms that inspire your work, and how you use them in your creation?
It's really strange because I was discussing this with somebody else the other day. It's how intentional am I when it comes to my work? And the truth of the matter is, I tend to not start writing from an intentional sort of point of view. It comes generally like a thought or like a visceral response to something, or moment music in my head or something, and I start writing from there. And so when it comes to, as far as I have this habit of writing, and it's a habit that a lot of non-native theater makers have suggested I cure myself of, but I have this habit of writing in the magical realm, always weaving it in with my plays as I write. And I just, for me, you know, we're here, but the reality of here, the reality of our story, the reality of us being is not just this three-dimensional world. Like, I'm not sure how many dimensions there are. There's maybe 6 or 12 or 14. So I almost think, like, to me, magical realm, the spirit realm, the ancestor realm is almost like dark matter. So while our stories are happening, they're weaving around us and inhabiting the space with us and sort of supporting us. And so I tend to write that way. And then I get a lot of dramaturgical questions about, but this seems out of left field. And it's like, no, that's her auntie. Or no, that's bad one. And so that's sort of how I sort of work within the form. Let the form go. It's just how, just letting the way we were raised and told our stories and told to live in the world and just inhabit the space of the play itself. And I try to work to fit it within, you know, I mean, people say, the Aristotelian play structure. It's like, I don't even necessarily always know what that means. It's like I went back and Googled it and sort of, okay, let me see, how does that apply? But it's more from an organic form of trying to tell the story and get the moment and the spirit and the spirituality of that moment happening within the story, because they're all connected. I it's hard for me to separate it from my storytelling. So that's how I do that. And I think Rhiana looks like she wants to talk.
Mhm. Yes, Rhiana, you're next. Ooh, Rhiana, I think you're muted.
I guess someone unmuted me right when I unmuted me. Yeah, when you mentioned, I guess it's a trigger, right? When you mention Aristotelian play form, that's what I was thinking about when the question is asked, because the the way that Native folks tell stories and write stories, it's just it's not often rooted in that Aristotelian format, which is really engineered to have a person's nervous system do things involuntarily. I think that's my analysis of what Aristotelian play form is, and we see it in film structure, right? We see it in every well-made play. Um, where my theater company, we just produced a play by Yvette Nolan called The Unplugging, and for those who don't know Yvette Nolan, she's just one of the most respected and lauded First Nations theater makers in Canada. And we were really lucky to have the opportunity to host her here during the window in the pandemic, and this fall when we could do an outdoor production. And this play, it very much follows this non-Aristotelian structure, this sort of like more organic indigenous way of being, because one of the things that Aristotelian structure is, it's like deep in conflict, and I think a lot of times Native folks kind of want to avoid conflict, right? And instead of like conflict as plot points, we have complication, right? Um, and then also we often focus characters, just like Vickie mentioned, in the spirit world, dimensions that are normal parts of our lives, but aren't necessarily part of that white Western Judeo-Christian Cartesian worldview. And then also we have characters that we value, such as older women. That you don't often see older women or two older women at the center of stories. And so this play did all of those things, but there was something that happened in the actual performance of the play that kind of blew my mind, because I didn't realize this until it was actually in production. And again, remembering we come from oral cultures, we didn't rely on the written word to pass down information. Um, and so when you read the play, I think you can see these markers of indigenous structure. But then when it's actually performed and and it was directed by Yvette Nolan, there was this really beautiful moment in the play that is described. But when it's actually played out, it's a silent scene. It's a silent scene of building, and there wasn't even like, usually in a play, the producer would kind of like freak out, like, why are these actors just doing things, but there's no words and there's no music accenting it to tell the audience you should be feeling this. um, so it was this moment where they were building the camp that is created in the first act of the play. And it was just an invitation to stillness and contemplation and being rather than doing. And it clicked for me, like, oh, that is a huge piece of indigenous storytelling. It We have so many moments where we ask the audience, and those are legitimate plot points. We ask the audience to be instead of to do, and to contemplate. And it's very easy on the nervous system, because I think another thing that we do as Native people when we write works is that I think that indigenous culture is a culture that is incredibly respectful of how a person wants to hold and conduct their own body and their own body boundaries. Like, there aren't a lot of practices in our cultures, and I'm kind of generalizing as indigenous people, where we are being very invasive about how to be a person. Just like we didn't have these strict rules with gender, right? We didn't have these strict rules around sexuality. We didn't have these policing of the body. And that's another really interesting thing that, like, I think that is a fantastic way that Native artists explore form. And as we take that Euro form and we make it our own and create it because it, you know, I mean, now it's a form of communication that all as Americans we, you know, we do. But I still think that there are so many beautiful moments of intact Native specificity and culture that that we as Native artists put into our work, and that needs to be appreciated. But it's also something that I think that non-Native people need to actually be taught, and they need to learn about, just in the way that, you know, we go to the MoMA and we learn about modern art and we figure out what's cubism and you know, and surrealism and all of that. I think in the same way that there needs to be some reciprocity, so that the ways that we manipulate form can be appreciated more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Rhiana, and yeah, I mean, I just know, especially, you know, being here in New York City, which is also, of course, Lenape Hoking, but the idea of just being without doing something, I think, is you know, it really is kind of a, or it feels like it would be a foreign thing to many people here, and I'm sure other parts of the country as well. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The next, just to kind of to take this subject matter and segue into our next, and actually I'll start with Vickie on this. You know, we talked about form, and I guess we also, you know, touched on inspiration as well. But so, are there certain what kind of subject matters do you find yourself usually, you know, gravitating towards, or interest you in your work?
For me, again, probably just because of how I was raised, it's all about, and for me, it's about intersectionality. It's about being Indigenous and being in the world outside as well. It's kind of, you know, that push pull, that sort of, what do we lose when we have to compromise and be in this sort of colonized big space outside of our little individualized spaces. And it's all the contradictions and difficulties of that, the divided loyalties, the again, the wanting to avoid conflict and yet at the same time wanting to stay honorable, stay living in the good way, with, you know, in connection with your community and in connection with the land and living respectfully. So it's those little conflicts. Like, most of my stories are about, basically, like, I like to write from a contemporary Native viewpoint, um, from people who are in a compromised situation, and sometimes they've gotten themselves into it, and sometimes it's sort of been thrust upon them. But it I like the idea of duality, and dealing with that. It's sort of like the twins. I know I'm always rattling on about the twins, but the creator and his brother, I like that question of the balance, the push pull. And it's funny because in Western Christian tradition, that means God and the devil, good and evil, and it's not with us. It's not good and evil. It's good mind, bad mind, clear-headed, not so clear-headed. That sort of both, and yet both create change, both create impact on the world, both, like, what is it, like, good mind created the fish, bad mind created the bones, so you had to work for it and you didn't gobble them all up. The thorns on the fruit, the thorns on the berries, that was to make sure you didn't overfeed yourselves, you know, and things like that. So there's it's kind of that sort of balance. And I do, like, I really sort of want to deal with who we are today, right now, and things like, my latest piece is about a woman who has a missing sister, but it's also about erasure, like, sort of the erasure of our culture in the world at large as far as in the media, because media is how we validate ourselves now, sadly. And so the erasure of who we are in the media, the erasure of our issues. COVID-19 was the biggest example, what the Dene folks went through. And it didn't even get noticed until like 4 months later. Like, what? You know, they had the highest COVID rates, and everybody's like, well, maybe they should. It's like, maybe they should have access to fresh water supplies, folks. You know, like there's I mean, I'm speaking on your people's behalf, Rhiana, and I shouldn't, and I apologize for that, but you know what, I'm just speaking in a general sense. It just started this. So I tend to write, she circles back again, I'm writing talking in circles because that's me. I'm the circle, I make my way around. But my inspiration tends to be what has ticked me off recently, and what has ticked me off about being Indigenous in the modern world. And yeah, so like Uchiwake, which is actually our word, Skaruve, for bitter, means like bitter for food, but I'm choosing to apply other interpretations as well. But it's about this woman who is fed up with performative activism and just wants something real to happen in her situation. But so that's my inspiration, is just like whatever sort of frustrates me at the time, and I sort of get around to it. Yeah, and yeah, like I said, it's never, I never think it out ahead of time. It's usually just something that starts me, and then I start writing. And next, thank you.
Great, thank you, Vickie. Next, I'll pose that question to you, Mara.
Actually, I got lost in those circles, which were so wonderful. Could you restate that question?
Sure. No problem. Basically, I was just saying, you know, in terms of segueing from forms, and we also did touch on inspiration. I wanted to ask each of our panelists the subject matter that they find themselves most interested in, or that they gravitate towards, or inspires their work and creative process.
Yes, I will say two things, and one that actually has to do with that circle and that spiral. So I will say something I learned from my mother and also my grandmother is that your kindness, for example, and your charity, if you will, begins at home. So meaning in the center, right? So don't just be nice and cute and sweet to the people that you meet on the street you don't know. You be nice and kind and sweet to the people you speak to every day. Like my grandma didn't have a lot of money, but she still, for the Mission Catholic Church, she made the cakes for the bake sale, but she made them at home always first. She never, all her children, they had cake too. And so for example, Cherokee designs, when you make a design, they start in the center and then outward. Cherokee language, when you make the words, they start in the center. You have a core, and then on the beginning and the end, it has to do with who's talking and where it's going on. So to me, a lot of the time when I'm inspired to make things, they start in the middle and then they move outwards, you know, from me to family to community to world community to other folks, other beings. And so that's an inspiration for me, that circle and that spiral, you know, this never ending and always going. So that's something that is inspirational to me. And also the story. I think in stories. You know, I remember things in stories. If you tell me a story, if you give me some information about dates and generals, I will not remember anything, you know, but if you tell me a story, I can remember that. And I tell stories and I remember stories. And so I know that retelling of the story, whether it be a story about, you know, what numbers are important, whether it be a story about how to cook certain something, you know, whatever that story is, because I've made dances about all of these things. So whatever that story is, it's about the retelling of the story, to honor the storyteller, but also to make sure that information gets out there, because stories are made to be told. There's people need to know that information. And so whether it's something small, it may be a short story, it may be a very longer story, but that format and that information is forever inspiring to me.
That's great. Thank you, Wanishi. Thank you, Mara. And I pose the same question to Rhiana.
Yeah. What is inspiring? I think that when I want to tell a story, so now that I'm into filmmaking, I'm just about to premiere my first film, which is crazy. And then also just as a playwright. So I really do think of myself as a playwright, as a script writer, first of all, more than anything. And I think that a big piece of why I write what I write is because I'm trying to figure out why these things happen. I noticed when I was a little girl that I would turn to film and stories, television. I didn't have a lot of access to theater, so that wasn't really part of it until I was like, I don't know, really like in ninth grade or college. But when I think about like all of the events that were happening to me as I was coming of age, I saw examples in the media. Just like Vickie said, that's how we learn how to be. And so as an artist now, I am still doing that. I'm still trying to figure out why things happen, why moments take place. I'm interested in the way that people communicate. I'm interested in why communication doesn't happen. I'm interested in individual personalities and what makes up that personality so that they have this life experience. Right now, I'm going to be writing a play that is kind of takes a look at, like, I think for me, my whole life I've always felt like coming from a Navajo family, the Navajo worldview always kind of like felt a little different from everyone else. And I sort of was like, I didn't realize that some of these traits that I had were very specifically like handed down to me from a Navajo way of being. And some of these things are not helpful when you're in the white world, you know. And of course, we all know what that means. It means code switching, right? And each of us were raised with different cultural specificity. And I don't often code switch well. At least I didn't really understand that for a while. And you know, so like for instance, if you just listen and you're not saying anything and you wait until that person is done, in some places it's sort of like that's taken wrong. Like, is this person stupid? They don't understand, you know. In some other cultures, interrupting each other is like the height of communication. Like, no, this, right? And a lot of times I think that as Native people, you know, we don't do that. But there are like innumerable examples of like worldview differences. And then as older I got, I started to realize, oh, there's not only just worldview differences being Native, but regionally Native. There are different ways because each tribe and each region interacts in a different way. And I moved to Minnesota, and that was, the whole Minnesota nice thing, trying to understand how do I communicate effectively in that environment. So oftentimes, I'm writing plays where I'm trying to figure out how people communicate, or I'm trying to unpack like why did this pain happen, try to understand like the larger picture around it. And then of course I'm always taking into account this larger sort of systemic racism that we are in this soup of, living in the US. And then, of course, you can add in a lot of other layers, right? Whether you're neurotypical or not, and what are your specific cultural stuff. So that's what my plays are often like, sort of like figuring out. I don't stray from subject matter. Like, for instance, I've written a play about French surrealism, and contrasting that with Navajo art. Written a play recently about Nancy Reagan, and that's super fun. And then my film that I just finished, it's an intertribal love story. So that's kind of fun to see those interesting differences. Yeah, that's probably my biggest inspiration. Just like, I can't figure out the world, I better write about it.
Great, wonderful. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And well, Nancy Reagan, boy, I haven't heard that in a long time. I wouldn't have expected that to come up on this panel, but that's true. You never know. Well, I wasn't sure if I'd hear Aristotelian, but I imagine that would certainly come up, and and being the first year in the PhD theater and performance program, of course you're going to hear Aristotelian. But I must say that this panel is almost like a class in of itself. So I want to thank everyone for everything that's been said so far. For our next topic, we're going to take a little bit of a turn, and so with obstacles in terms of creating and producing native theater, and I'm just just curious, basically for this segment, what are some of the obstacles that you create, that you come up against in creating your work, and what are your methods and to overcome it? And I'll start with Maura.
Thank you. I'll speak about dance because I can't speak about theater. But
my apologies. Okay. Yeah, no, my apologies. I'm sorry. I kind of defaulted it, but yeah, in terms of the native performing arts, yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I was giggling because I'm standing in front of a closet with a curtain over it right now. So I would say space. Space. And I really don't think that's necessarily native specific. Has to do with money, where the typical things have been awarded, which goes usually along the lines of the color lines, so it's part of a larger system. And then just for people in general in performing arts, space is a consistent problem, or I don't want to say problem, it's a consistent thing, a consistent issue. And so being conscious of how to get it, if one can afford it, and if one cannot, how do you make work that's not made for concert space? And when I say space, lots of times we're thinking of a box, right? We're thinking of a theater, but of course there's lots of other spaces. And there's this, thought, okay, well, if I'm making work that's not for a theater, where else can I use to rehearse? Where else can it be produced? How can it be creatively shown and marketed and shared if it's not in these spaces? So that whole thought of the concern and the issues of places to rehearse, places to have work shown, that's an ongoing thing that I would say is always on my mind. Also here, I was just speaking with my partner, in the so-called US, there's not there's not as many, dancers and choreographers who are working in non-powwow contemporary dance. And I say non-powwow because powwow is contemporary dance and beautiful and vibrant and huge and amazing. But for folks who are working more on the concert-y dance side, there's not a kind of a body. There's not national meetings that go on. In Canada, there is. In Australia, there is. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to be a part of that community also. But that, you know, that's something that we don't have here in the same way. And, you know, I won't say, I always hate to use the word barrier because it makes it seem like you can't get through it. But, you know, it's something that's there, that there's not a lot of, it's not as much communication and not as much support. So there's people working and, you know, we don't know, sometimes we don't know each other. We don't know what we're doing, and we're working in silos, and we're not as connected as we hope, I would like us to be. So those are some things I would have to say.
No, thank you. Thank you, Maura. Yeah. No, it is fascinating in terms of some of the structuralism that's in certain communities in other countries, and how the United States differs from that. That's so true. And and space. That's true. Like space. Next, I'll turn to Rhiana in regards to the obstacles that you confront in creating and producing your work.
Yeah. I just want to totally like validate what Maura is saying. So like, we need our land back. That's what I heard. Land back. # land back. Yeah. Well, you know, I think personally in my journey as an artist, I think the biggest thing that has reared its head is trauma. I just think that it's something that often undermines our work and continues to create so many issues, you know, in our country. I mean, I'm definitely, certainly we as Native folks, we have a very specific history of this trauma that involves a recovery from genocide and all that entails, and also just as Americans, the sin of genocide that still hasn't been reckoned with or reconciled. It's just created this foundation of trauma in our country that we don't address, and it's a very tangible thing. So I always sort of like overcouple this trauma with like being complicit with white supremacy, because I think that this is a field that is so incredible. It's so incredibly attractive to be complicit with white supremacy. There's so many great awards. There are so many like, you know, like, these little carrots that you know, whether it's money or fame, recognition, etc., that require leaving your culture behind, requires code switching, requires even a huge amount of educating non-Native folks and others. That I think that it's probably the biggest struggle as a Native person to really get that under control, because I think that I don't know, I hope I'm not going in a crazy tangent, but just the way that even in like the sort of like liberal white guilt is so incredibly inviting to be complicit with white supremacy when it comes to people who have communities that have a lot of trauma, and then especially as a Native American community, I have just seen too many moments where we have had these moments to overcome and to decide what do I value? What is my compass? What's my moral compass, and what do I value? and that takes a lot of personal reckoning and personal understanding, overcoming historical trauma and dealing with the trauma that you grew up with. And that's why I think that Native people are just, I'm constantly shown how incredibly resilient and strong we are because of all of these obstacles that do create these barriers to a happy, well-lived life that is fulfilling with creativity. Yeah, that's been the thing I've seen, and many times I do write about it. It's one of the things I'm trying to understand and trying to figure out, and have over the course of my tenure at my theater company, being the artistic director, is just trying to figure out, like, what can I do to learn more about responding to trauma and understanding it, and it's a constant journey. It's a constant thing to learn about.
No, so true, Rhiana. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I don't know, as a moderator, if I'm supposed to, agree and be be so enthused, but obviously I'm a part of this community myself, so I can't help but say, yes, that's right, be part of the cheering section.
And it doesn't mean that, like, I don't want to see Native people incredibly successful. But I think we can do that without being complicit in white supremacy. I think we can do that rooted in our values and creating community the whole way. And I think that's what is so strong about us as Native people. And especially if you look at Native activism, especially since Standing Rock in 2016, it has been
Right.
rooted in spirituality and prayer. I think the best parts of our activism lately has been rooted in spirituality and prayer and community and Native values. And I think that's the direction Native theater, performing arts, really must be in.
Great, thank you. So true. And Vickie, would you mind sharing with us some of the obstacles that you find yourself coming up against, and how you overcome it?
Sure. I just want to co-sign both Mara and Rhianna's statements, like, times 100. And this is a conversation, Ryan. You're a moderator, but this is a Native circle. So please pop up and talk when you want to talk, because everybody gets to talk, But for me, it's absolutely I think it all ties to this weird sort of tool of, and I'm going to say it, tool of white supremacy, because it does all tie back to that colonial superstructure, that sort of invasive thing, that controlling sort of overriding aspect of things. And it's that scarcity mentality that is imposed upon the arts. I think, especially in this country, I mean, other countries are trying to fight back a bit. When, as you mentioned, that in Australia, New Zealand, especially too, there is more Indigenous presence in arts. There's more all around support for the arts from the community at large. And that is not what happens here. One of the things we've sort of been programmed to expect is that the arts is a privilege, not a right. This is not that we have to compete against each other to get these exclusive little awards or slots in these established, reputable theaters, to prove that we are equivalent to these playwrights, these Western playwrights who, it's funny because and I look at some of the playwrights that get produced over and over and over and over again. And a lot of the stories, while they're interesting and fun, a lot of them are just, don't change a moment, don't change a day. I remember going to see a play because I got free tickets on one of my residencies for a family retreat in the Catskills, and just watching, like, your basic little romantic contratone. And I'm like, we can't write this in Native theater. If we write this, nobody produces us. They want to see we have to validate ourselves by lancing the boil of our trauma on stage somehow. We have to show them how our pain has impacted our lives. And forgive me, but I grew up with that every day. Like, it's not the focus of the stories. I mean, it's there. Of course it's there. It's pervasive in everything, but I just don't see the need to exploit it on stage like that. But then you get the feedback that but it doesn't seem like a Native story if you tell this story this way. And it's like, and so how many reses have you hung out at that you're telling me that this doesn't seem like a Native story to you? It's and again, it's that thing about pitting us against each other to compete for these prizes. And don't get me wrong, I'm actually, if you win a prize without compromising yourself, then huzzah, kick butt, fabulous. I am cheering for you. I am so excited. I'm so, like, Ms. Rhiana Yazzie is quite accomplished. Google her, you'll see. But it makes me want to celebrate every time I see one of the prizes won. But I also, it's taken a long time for us to be able to stand up and say, no, we're not going to cater to what you consider is important. No, we're not going to cater to, like, I remember somebody getting excited because the numbers had come out for the residential schools, the boarding schools. And they were like, oh, you should add that to your, and I'm like, no, because I'm not writing about that. It's in everything I write because my family went through that I don't need to write that play. And I don't need to show it in there so everybody can feel bad about it collectively in a group that isn't my community. You know, it's, so for me, I'm trying to speak up. I'm very much I want to listen to you. I want to listen to your opinion and take it in and learn because you have expertise that I do not have. However, at the same time, I'm starting to learn when it's a point of view that is just not mine that is coming in, and it's like, okay, wait a second, no, you're changing the intention of the story. You're changing the intention of why I got up and wrote. So that's the way I try to fight it. I try to fight it as diplomatically as possible. Sometimes it doesn't always happen, but I try to be there. But yeah, it's amazing how insidious that systemic racism is, that sort of monster creature. And I just, for everybody, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, everyone, including the folks in charge right now, art is not a privilege, it's a right. Take your space, claim your voice, step up and find every chance you can to put it out there. So that's me.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I would say that's probably one of the quotes from today is art is a right. It's not a privilege. So probably one of the last topics that we'll have is the future of Native theater post-pandemic, and in terms of what your thoughts and desires are for Native theater. And we'll start with you, Rhiana.
Okay. Oh, all right. Let's see. Yeah, the future of Native theater post-pandemic. I think that something that's come up a lot is a lot of Native folks are reticent to be, during this pandemic to like not put our people in danger, which theater needs needs a group of people to be performed to, and so I do think that maybe there's going to be this additional level of like care that's going to. I think that as Native artists that we've always had that, like we always think about that, but I think that it's going to just be like even more solidified in some of the practices, because I think that as theater artists, when we learned to do theater, it was so steeped in white American white supremacist theater, which is so detrimental to the body and the nervous system, to the family system. Like for instance, so many people who go into theater can't even have children. So what does it mean if Indigenous people go into theater and don't have children? That's just like an additional like sort of continuation of genocide. Oh, these certain careers are not open to Indigenous people because it carries on genocide. I think that there's a lot of unspoken reasons why Native people don't do theater. And I think that a lot of those unspoken reasons is because of white supremacist practices in theater. I think it's the reason why a lot of BIPOC people don't do it. And then when we do, there's all of these barriers and gatekeeping that happens. So I do feel incredibly optimistic about some of the leadership change that's come into some theaters, especially with new BIPOC artistic directors who so far I've spoken to a good handful, and just so much like love and care for trying to do things different and reaching out to Native people and trying to understand it. So I'm optimistic, but I can tell you one thing: there hasn't been one white artistic director from a predominantly white institution that has reached out to me. So I don't know if those folks are going to change. So they do, and they absolutely need to change. But I also just think about like it within Native circles. I think about like tribal colleges that every year there's an AHEC conference, American Indians in Higher Education. And one time I got to be the judge for the theater. There was a theater contest, like 4 different tribal, I think it was like 8, and it was narrowed down to 4 by the time, I sat in front of and watched. But I was just so like inspired by the ingenuity of Native people doing theater on their own terms, who didn't go through the sausage factory of academia for what theater's supposed to be. And it's brilliant. And I just think that that's a really wonderful thing. And one last thing I'll say, I was very, very lucky. I just saw the opening of a play of mine that I wrote 13 years ago that never got produced. and it was at Fort Lewis College. And like the Native actors, like the number of young Native actors, and they were just brilliant, amazing actors. And so I was just shocked, because when I went through when I got my degree, I was the only Native person in the theater department, and it caused deep fear for me every day. but I just think I think that there's going to be way more Native folks doing theater, and I'm excited to see what new stories and new ways that ground is broken.
Great. Thank you, Rhiana. And my apologies for my little technical difficulty a few minutes ago. If I may just ask a quick follow-up question, what do you think the increase perhaps in Native or young Native people wanting to go into the arts may be compared to previous generations?
Well, my answer might be a little pessimistic, and I wasn't going to say it, but I did wonder if, but I think this is a larger question we are constantly asking ourselves as Native people, is like, as we have next generations, how I think that there's more. When I think about my generation, when I think about my father's generation and my grandmother's, there's this successive access to the larger American society, right?
Okay.
And so now it's sort of like, oh, okay, there's this next generation who are digital natives, right? Who have had all of this technology. So it makes me, maybe it's not a pessimistic answer, but it does tell me that there's a certain cultural element that is no longer as big of a gatekeeper to keep Native people out. Because I think when I think of my father ever trying to do theater, that his cultural difference with mainstream theater, like doing theater, would have been miles apart. Like,
Okay.
and then I think about like my own experience starting off. It was like, it was painful, but I got through it. But that was because I had so much like support from some helpful adults. And so I wonder if that's a part of it, you know, and
Mhm.
I guess I don't want to assume that's because, oh, our cultures are becoming less or whatever. I mean, that's absolutely not something to assume. In fact, I think native Zennials are like way more political and way more deeply into revitalization of culture than I've seen in so long. So yeah, I don't think it's a pessimistic answer. Yeah, I just had to talk it out.
No, totally, totally. Yeah, yeah. I don't think it's complex, right? We talked about some of the complexities earlier. So, um, so Vicky, I'll turn to you now in terms of like what are your thoughts and hopes on the future of Native theater as we come out of this pandemic.
Well, I have to again echo some of the things that Rhiana said, because one of the things I noticed during the pandemic is when we started the Zoom process, and again, there's a lot of mixed response to Zoom as a theater substitute or a stand-in, or this as an alternate, an alternate version of theater. But what I will say is that Zoom gave us that sense of community, and it was pan native, but we also had access to our own communities directly if we were part of the diaspora. We moved on. We could reach back and reach out to people of our nation and create together, and that was the biggest thing about Zoom. Is well, alternately feeling thoroughly cut off from theater theaters themselves, I felt like a larger part of the Indigenous theater community. I felt like a stronger link than I ever have before because of how siloed we normally are. There's just a few of us in, like, New York is a bigger collection of Indigenous folks than most places, so we can find a fairly decent sized group of us when we're all in town. But generally, as a rule of thumb, you go somewhere and you're lucky if you get the native people, and like find two native people in the area to come out to your show. And so I definitely really appreciate that digital access that these kids are more accustomed to and better with working with than I, has opened up possibilities for them, because I've been teaching as well over this period. And the work with Alter Theater, with reaching out to the Fort Peck Reservation and other kids that are scattered across the country who grew up like we did, without having any idea of if theater that's a possibility. Like, what's the difference between theater and a film, or what's the difference between theater and TV? Because where I went to school, there was no drama club, there was no teaching. If we read any play, it was Hamlet in English class, and it was part of the curriculum at all. And there are some kids who don't even have access to that. And so I definitely see that post pandemic, that possibilities have been open. I've seen some young faces starting to realize that they get to use their voice, and their voice is valuable, that people respond to their voice. Like, watching these kids realize they write something or they create a piece together, and just seeing that look on their faces when they put it together and perform it, or they read it, or an actor reads it for them, that they get this sort of validation, this confidence that I never had, probably Rhianna never had, that their voices have value. So that's what I see. I see the wave coming up big, guys. I see more and more, they're going to be seeing more and more Indigenous faces around and holding them accountable. And I'm excited for it. I'm hopeful. I'm feeling, with all the work that is being done with the activism that the Millennials are doing, it's breaking down barriers, and we have people with the focus who are starting to go ahead and claim the place, because I know when I was younger, I was an activist too, but I also, and I can't cure myself of this yet, hover by the door and wait to be invited in, versus these kids will just walk in, and I love it. I love that confidence in their presence, and yeah, I think there's going to be a wave of these wonderful creatives. These kids are going to just knock everybody's socks off. That's from me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yep. Yeah. And Mara, would you mind sharing with us your thoughts and hopes in regards to a native dance and performing arts post pandemic?
I'm going to answer with just a question thought.
Sure.
But right when Standing Rock first started, I had the chance to go up there. There was supplies that had to go from Haskell to Standing Rock, and I happened to have a truck, so we took them up there. But at that point, it was still early, and what I remember seeing is that there were camps from different nations, right? From all these different nations, from within the United States, from Guatemala, from Canada. There were people that had come from some Pacific places. Black Lives Matter people were there, actually. Cherokee Nation was bringing in stuff. Someone had arrived on a horse, I think from Crow Nation. There's all different peoples. And when I looked, you got there, you dropped off your supplies. There was a line of people to sort them, to say, okay, you have coats, we're going to put them over here. There was cooking going on. There were, women that were in the kitchen that were preparing food for everyone. There was buffalo, there was all peaches, there was all different types of traditional food that was healthy. The toilets were set up to be, what's the word when it's not making, well, the toilets are waste, but where it's, I can't think of the word. It's this recycling fashion. Hopefully you know what I'm trying to say. But this was done with nation collaborating with nation, with people collaborating with people without the United States. It wasn't done for the United States. It wasn't done for the systems of the United States. It was done outside of those systems. So to me, I look to that, and whether or regardless of what had happened afterwards and how things are going, that can never be taken away, right? That happened and will continue. It will never go away. That has happened. Those coming togethers of nations. So nation building. I don't want to say I don't care about the United States. I care about the human beings that are here and the plants and the trees, but that structure is not very interesting to me, and I personally hope it goes away. So the nation building, that is my answer. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I know I've said that a lot, absolutely, in this moderation, but I mean that's the best word I can think of to second everything that everyone has said. But yeah, nation building and solidarity, and we certainly saw that at Standing Rock, and I would say, if there's anything to come out of this horrible pandemic, it has, I feel, and I guess I'm speaking personally, that it's helped get us, at least some of us anyway, back to basics, right? Like what really matters: the storytelling, our community, solidarity. I mean, that's in the end that's the most important thing. Back to those values. Well, I want to say Wanishi to all of our panelists and to everyone here. Again, speaking for myself, I really felt like today's panel was like medicine for me, and it really does help to get back to that moral compass, which I believe was also said today. And yeah, I mean, I certainly hope that, and will certainly, do everything I can in terms of, trying to help, the next generation and current, along with current generations and of Native theater and Native dance and performing arts in terms of telling their stories and opportunities. And it is one of our goals, and one of my objectives here also at the CUNY Graduate Center, which is Prelude Festival is a part of, is to also work on documenting Native performing arts that's happening in perhaps a new journal and whatnot that'll be for Native performing artists. So I do hope that can all be part of the future. And so again, Wanishi to everyone listening. And this is Opalanietet coming to you from the Lenape island of Manhattan. So take care and have a good evening. Bye.